Hello, friends. We want to know from which cities you listen to us. Like and write in the comments where you are from, and also share what shocking stories happened in your city or even to you. Subscribe because the next story may be about your city or your personal drama. And now a new exciting story. Ethan Brown leaned back in his ergonomic chair, the faint hum of his office air conditioner merging with the clack of keyboards around him. His desk at the Chicago tech company was a fortress of monitors, post-it notes, and half-drunk coffee mugs. At 35, he had just been promoted to lead software engineer, a job that brought him a corner office, a 20% raise, and a catch: frequent travel to the company's Silicon Valley office. The news had been out for a week, and he was still riding a wave of euphoria, even if the paperwork was wearing him down. He glanced at his phone 4:47 p.m. and saw a message from Sarah, his wife of 5 years. "Grab some milk on the way home." "Okay," Ethan typed quickly. "Okay," and put the phone down, looking at the framed photo on the table. It was a picture of him and Sarah at a Cubs game 2 summers ago, her laughing, him trying to scrub cheese sauce stains off his t-shirt, smiling awkwardly. They looked happy. They mostly looked happy now. But lately, Ethan had noticed a slight edge to her voice when she talked about his trips to California. He chalked it up to the stress of her job. She worked late at her nonprofit. Nothing serious. At least, he hoped. The office was emptying, and employees were heading for the elevators. Ethan saved the code, grabbed his jacket, and headed to the parking lot. The drive to Oak Park was a familiar 25 minutes, enough time to relax with a podcast about cybersecurity. He pulled into the driveway of their 2-story house, a cozy brick building they'd bought 3 years ago. The lawn was in need of a mow, he noted, mentally adding it to his to-do list. He grabbed the milk from the passenger seat and walked inside. "Sarah, I'm home," he called, kicking off his shoes at the door. The smell of garlic and onions hit his nose. Something was stewing in the kitchen. "Here," Sarah's voice came from the kitchen. Ethan walked in to find her at the stove, stirring a saucepan, her dark hair pulled back into a messy bun. She was still wearing her work clothes, her jacket hanging over the back of a chair. The kitchen was warm, the cozy disarray Ethan loved. Dirty dishes in the sink, a cutting board with chopped basil, and a half-finished glass of red wine on the counter. "Hey," he said, setting the milk down and kissing her cheek. "This smells amazing. Pasta night?" "Spaghetti bolognese," Sarah replied with a small smile. "I thought we could use something filling. Long day?" "The usual. Debugging code, meetings for the sake of meetings. You know," he opened the fridge, took out a beer, and clicked the lid. "And you?" "I'm exhausted," she said, stirring the sauce a little more quickly. "We're getting ready for a grant deadline, and my boss is rewriting everything at the last minute. Honestly, I'm on edge." Ethan nodded, taking a sip of beer. "Sounds bad. Maybe I should cut something. I'm almost a pro with a knife now." Sarah snorted, glancing at him. "Oh yes, of course, Chef Brown. Last time you almost took your finger off chopping onions." "It was a strategic move," he grinned, leaning against the tabletop. "I wanted you to feel sorry for me." "Yeah, it worked," she rolled her eyes, but the corners of her lips twitched into a smile. "Okay, if you want to help, chop the basil. Just be careful, for God's sake." Ethan picked up a knife and began chopping the greens, trying not to look like it was his first time holding a cutting board. "So, how are your plans for California going?" Sarah asked, her voice even, but Ethan could hear the slight tension. "Do you know when you'll be going for the first time yet?" "Not yet," he answered, concentrating on the basilica. "Probably in a couple of weeks. They want me there with the team to work on a new project. 3 or 4 days, no more." 3 or 4 days, she repeated, stirring the sauce. "And then again and again. Often, yes." Ethan shrugged, trying to keep his voice light. "Well, not exactly every week. Maybe once a month, twice at most. And it won't be for long, Sarah. Plus, they pay well for these trips. We'll finally be able to finish renovating the bathroom." Sarah nodded but said nothing, her gaze fixed on the pot. Ethan felt something heavy in the air, but decided not to press. He finished the basil and poured it into the bowl. "Here's your order, ma'am," he said, pushing the bowl toward him. "What next?" "Thank you," she replied, a little softer. "Now we just wait for the sauce to finish cooking. You can set the table." Ethan got out plates, forks, and glasses, setting them out on the dining room table. It was getting dark outside, and the streetlights were already on. He turned on the lamp over the table, filling the room with warm light. Sarah brought over a pot of pasta and sauce, and they sat down to dinner. "Delicious," Ethan said, twirling spaghetti around his fork. "You're a master of bolognese." "I'll try," she replied, taking a sip of wine. "At least I can control something." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "What are you talking about?" "Nothing," she shook her head, but her tone was a little sharper than necessary. "It's just work, travel, all that. Sometimes it feels like everything's going to hell and I can't get anything done." "Hey," he said, putting down his fork. "You know I'm here, right? If you need me to take on more chores or anything, just let me know." Sarah looked at him, her eyes lingering on his face for a second, as if she was searching for something. "I know, Ethan. It's just, these trips of yours. They stress me out. I know it's part of the job, but still." "Really?" He frowned. "I thought you were okay with it. You know, promotion, more money, all that." "Money is great," she said, setting her glass down. "But you know it's not just about the money. You'll be leaving, and I'll be here alone, and I've got a lot on my plate. And, I don't know, I just don't want us to grow apart." Ethan felt a pang of guilt. He reached across the table and took her hand. "We won't grow apart, Sarah. I promise. It's just a few trips. I'll call, text, send you stupid pictures from California. And maybe you'll come with me sometime, huh? We'll take a mini vacation." She smiled weakly, but her gaze was still serious. "Maybe. We'll see." They finished dinner in relative silence, the conversation drifting to small talk. The neighbor parking in their spot again, the new TV show Sarah wanted to watch. But Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something was left unsaid. After dinner, he loaded the dishwasher while Sarah put the remaining sauce in a container. "I think I'll go take a shower," she said, drying her hands with a towel. "I'm dog-tired." "Go," he replied, closing the dishwasher. "I'll sort this out." After she went upstairs, Ethan leaned against the kitchen counter, staring at the empty beer in his hand. He thought about what she'd said, about how she'd said, "I don't want us to grow apart." That wasn't like Sarah. She rarely said things like that outright. Maybe he'd underestimated how much it was hurting her. Or maybe it wasn't just the trips. He sighed and threw the bottle into the trash. "Tomorrow is a day off. We can talk normally without rushing." Saturday morning at the Brown house began with the smell of freshly brewed coffee and the sound of a vacuum cleaner humming upstairs. Ethan stood in the kitchen, scrolling through a cooking website on his tablet, trying to figure out how long to roast a pork tenderloin. He and Sarah were expecting guests today, his sister, Laura, and their mutual friend, Mia, who had returned to Chicago after years of travel due to her father's military service. Dinner was supposed to be a warm evening of reminiscing, but Ethan sensed that Sarah was determined to make everything perfect too perfect. "Ethan, have you checked the oven?" Sarah called from above, her voice cutting through the hum of the vacuum. "Yeah, got it all under control," he said, opening the oven and checking the temperature. 180 degrees, just like the recipe called for. He pulled the tenderloin out of the fridge, seasoned that morning with salt, pepper, and rosemary, and carefully placed it in a baking dish. There was a bottle of Pinot Noir on the counter nearby. Ethan had picked it out at the supermarket the day before, hoping it would go well with the meat. He wasn't much of an expert, but the salesman swore it was a universal choice. In the living room, Sarah was wiping down the coffee table, though Ethan was sure it was already sparkling. She had already moved the vase of flowers to the windowsill, straightened the cushions on the sofa, and even wiped down the mirror in the entryway. Ethan noticed her glance at herself in the mirror, straightening a stray strand of hair. "Sarah, relax," he said, coming out of the kitchen with a towel over his shoulder. This is Laura and Mia, not the cleanliness committee. They're not going to check for dust under the couch. Sarah turned around, holding a rag and furniture spray. Her brows were slightly furrowed, but she smiled. I know, it's just, Mia hasn't been here for so many years. I want things to be human. And Laura always notices little things, you know her. Ethan rolled his eyes, but good-naturedly. Laura will only notice if we serve her pizza from delivery instead of dinner. Seriously, this will be cool. I'm almost done with the meat. Okay, Sarah sighed and put the rag down. Just don't burn the pork, okay? And check the potatoes. They should be ready to bake. Yes, Chief, he saluted, heading back into the kitchen. In fact, Ethan enjoyed cooking. It was his way of disconnecting from work, from thoughts of his upcoming trip to California, from the slight tension that still hung between him and Sarah from their conversation a few days ago. He sliced potatoes, drizzled them with olive oil, and sprinkled them with herbs, humming an old commercial jingle under his breath. An hour later, the kitchen was filled with the aroma of roasting meat and garlic. Ethan checked the wine 2 bottles would be enough for 4 people. He even dug out the old decanter he and Sarah had received as a wedding gift and poured the wine into it, as he put it, to look cultured. Sarah, finished cleaning, came down to the kitchen, already wearing the dark green dress she wore on special occasions. You look gorgeous, Ethan said, putting the potato pan in the oven. Is this all for Mia, or has Laura finally earned your fancy look? Sarah snorted, but her cheeks turned slightly pink. For my own sake, if you want to know. And so I don't have to listen to Laura grumbling about me wearing jeans around the house. What about dinner? It already smells good. The meat will be ready in about 20 minutes, the potatoes too. I cut the salad, I'll make the dressing before serving. We're on schedule. He wiped his hands on a towel and looked at her. Are you sure everything is okay? You seem kind of on edge. Sarah crossed her arms, leaning against the counter. I'm not nervous. I just want to have a good evening. Mia has been telling me so much about her adventures, and I'm here. You know, work, home, nothing special. I don't want to seem boring. Ethan frowned, stepping closer. Boring? Sarah, are you serious? You run projects that actually help people, we have a cool house, and by the way, you make the best bolognese in Oak Park. Mia will be thrilled just to be back with us. She smiled weakly, but her gaze was slightly distant. Maybe you're right. I don't know. Okay, forget it. Let's check the table instead. I want everything ready before they arrive. Ethan nodded, deciding not to push. He walked into the living room, where Sarah had already set out plates and glasses. The table looked like something out of a magazine. A white tablecloth, candles in the center, even the napkins were folded into neat triangles. Ethan whistled. If programming doesn't work, we can open a catering service. It looks like a restaurant. Don't suck up, Sarah replied, but her voice was warmer. Better check if we forgot anything. Laura's going to ask where dessert is. Dessert, Ethan slapped his forehead. Damn, I knew I was missing something. Do we have anything? There's ice cream in the freezer, and I bought a pie from the bakery yesterday. That'll be enough unless Laura decides to have a tasting. Sarah glanced at her watch. They'll be here in half an hour. I'll check the bathroom again, and you keep an eye on the oven. Ethan returned to the kitchen, where the oven hummed softly and the smells grew richer. He pulled out the meat to check the temperature 165 degrees, perfect. The potatoes were crisp, and he turned off the oven, leaving everything to finish cooking. The decanter of wine sat on the table, with a bowl of arugula, tomato, and Parmesan cheese next to it. Ethan felt a little proud. He and Sarah were doing well. When Sarah came down, she seemed a little calmer, though she was still fixing her hair as she set the pie on the counter. Ethan came over and put his hand on her shoulder. It'll be fine, he said quietly. Laura will whine, Mia will tell stories, and we'll just laugh and eat. Just like old times. Sarah nodded, covering his hand with hers. Yes, you're right. Thanks for bothering with the cooking. I appreciate it. That's my thing, he winked. Now let's open the wine. We need to check if we were poisoned at the supermarket. Sarah laughed, and Ethan felt the tension between them ease a little. They clinked their glasses, taking a sip when the doorbell rang. Br oak the silence. Sarah took a deep breath. It's time, she said, heading for the door. Ethan followed her, ready for an evening that he hoped would bring back some of the ease he'd seen in that Cubs game photo with Sarah. The dining room at the Browns' house was buzzing with conversations, laughter, and the clink of glasses. Ethan stood at the table, pouring Pinot Noir, careful not to spill a drop on the white tablecloth Sarah had chosen so carefully. Sliced pork tenderloin steamed in the center of the table, surrounded by bowls of potatoes, salad, and a basket of baguettes. The guests were already seated. Ethan's sister Laura was chatting with an old friend, Mia, who sat with a glass of wine and an easy smile. Across from them sat Tom and Lisa, longtime friends of the couple, and next to them sat Emily and Jack, another couple from their circle. Together, they created the cozy chaos that Ethan usually loved. But today, something was different. Ethan, you're a real chef, Laura said, cutting into a piece of pork. When did you learn to cook anything other than scrambled eggs? Oh, it was Sarah, he replied, taking his place next to his wife. She trained me. I hardly ever set the kitchen on fire now. Sarah, sitting to his left, snorted as she speared a potato with her fork. Almost is the key word. Do you want to remind me of how you almost burnt a pan of bacon last month? The guests laughed, and Ethan rolled his eyes, waving his hand dismissively. It was an experiment, dear. I wanted to test the limits of our fire alarm. Well, you're certainly a champion experimenter, Sarah teased, her tone light, but Ethan caught something sharp in it. He smiled to hide it, but her words stung more than usual. Maybe it was because Mia was at the table, and he felt a little awkward under her gaze. With her short dark hair and warm smile, Mia looked much as she did when the three of them, she, Ethan, and Sarah, had hung out in college. But years of separation while her family bounced around military bases had taken their toll. There was a new confidence, almost cockiness, in her demeanor. Ethan found himself avoiding her eyes when she spoke. Mia, tell me, what was it like in Germany? Asked Tom, sipping his wine. You spent a couple of years there, didn't you? Oh, Germany, that was something. Mia leaned back in her chair, her voice lively, as if she'd been waiting for this question. Based in Stuttgart, lots of Americans, but I still felt like I was in another universe. Never learned German, but the beer there was just fabulous. How did you cope with all these moves? Lisa asked, leaning forward. I'd go crazy if I was dragged to a new place every couple of years. Mia shrugged, but her gaze became a little more serious. You get used to it. Dad always said, pack your suitcase and stop whining. But honestly, sometimes I just wanted to settle down somewhere. That's why I came back to Chicago. Home is home. Ethan nodded, trying to join the conversation. I'm glad you're back. It was. Boring here without you. Mia looked at him, and her smile grew a little wider. Oh, really? And I thought you and Sarah were doing just fine here without me. There's the house, dinner, everything like the grown-ups do. Well, not without incident, Ethan said, trying to keep his tone light. But he could feel Sarah tense beside him, though she didn't show it as she sipped her wine. Adventure is an understatement, Sarah interjected, her voice playful but slightly suggestive. Ethan is a master of chaos. One day the code at work crashes, the next he decides he can fix the dishwasher. The guests laughed again, and Ethan forced himself to smile, even though her words stung. He was used to her teasing, it was part of their dynamic, but it sounded different today, like there was something personal in it. He took a sip of wine to hide his irritation. Well, the dishwasher still works, so I'm not hopeless, he said, looking at Sarah. She met his gaze, but quickly turned away, addressing Emily. Emily, how was your trip to Colorado with Jack? You went skiing, right? Ethan leaned back in his chair, feeling a slight tension building in his chest. He glanced at Mia, who was listening to Emily's story, but occasionally glancing in his direction. Every time their eyes met, he felt a strange discomfort, as if she saw something in him that he didn't. Or maybe it was just nostalgia memories of the days when the three of them could chat until the early hours in a dive bar. Ethan, are you still at your scam? Mia asked when the conversation about skiing died down. Sarah said you got promoted? Yeah, lead developer, he replied, trying to sound confident. I'm officially a big shot now, with a lot of business trips to California though. Cool, Mia raised an eyebrow. California is a dream. The sun, the startups, all that action. Not like our Chicago winters. Well, not exactly a dream, Ethan said, glancing sideways at Sarah. More work than beaches. But the pay is good. Oh, he's a star now, Sarah interjected, her tone once again slightly mocking. He'll be living on planes soon, and I'll be left to deal with his dirty socks. The table erupted in laughter again, but Ethan felt his cheeks heat up. He gripped his glass a little tighter than necessary. Well, I can wash my own socks, he said, trying to be funny, but his voice came out harsher than he intended. Sarah looked at him, her smile faltering slightly, but she quickly turned away, addressing Laura. Laura, tell me, how is your new project going? You are now in charge of marketing, aren't you? Ethan stared at his plate, trying to swallow his irritation. He knew Sarah meant no harm. Her jabs were part of their normal interactions. But today they were getting on his nerves, especially in front of Mia, who seemed to notice every little thing. He cut a piece of pork and concentrated on eating as the conversation flowed on. Ethan, are you okay? Mia asked quietly, leaning in a little closer as the others discussed Laura's work. You seem off. He blinked, caught off guard by her question. Yeah, it's fine, he replied, forcing a smile. It's just, it's been a while since we've seen each other. It's weird that you're here again. Weird in a good way, I hope. She narrowed her eyes, but her tone was warm. Sure, he said quickly. It's just, well, time flies, huh? You're all world travelers now. Mia laughed, and her laugh was so familiar that for a second Ethan felt like he was 20 again. World traveler? Well, that's too far. I'm just trying not to get lost in all this, and you seem to have settled in pretty well. I try, he replied, but his gaze involuntarily slid to Sarah, who was chatting animatedly with Jack. He didn't know why her jibes had offended him so much today. Maybe it was Mia, her presence that reminded him of the past. Or maybe it was the fact that he still couldn't forget their conversation about traveling and her words about not growing apart. As the dinner progressed, guests praised the food, the wine flowed, and the laughter grew louder. Dinner was in full swing at the Brown house. The empty plates of pork and potatoes had been pushed to the center of the table, and the second bottle of Pinot Noir was already being finished. Laughter and conversation filled the dining room, the candles on the table casting a warm glow on the faces of the guests. Ethan, sitting next to Sarah, tried to make conversation, although the slight tension from her banter still weighed on him. Across from him, Mia was talking about her latest movie, her lively voice drawing everyone's attention to the table. So Mia, are you in Chicago for a long time now? Lisa asked, pouring herself some wine. Or are you going off for more adventures? Mia shrugged, her dark eyes glinting in the candlelight. I hope for a long time. I'm tired of running around. It's time to settle down, find a normal job. Well, and maybe a normal guy, although I always have trouble with that. Oh, go ahead and tell me, Ethan's sister Laura said, leaning closer. You've probably dated some cool guys overseas, haven't you? Like rockers or bikers? Mia laughed, taking a sip from her glass. Cool is a strong word. There were a couple of guys who thought they were bad boys, with tattoos and leather jackets. But in the end, it all came down to posing. One even ran away when I asked him to help me move. And the other one, well, let's say his ego was bigger than his charisma. The table erupted in laughter, and even Ethan couldn't help but smile. Mia always had a way of telling a story that made everyone around her laugh. But he noticed Sarah, sitting next to him, tense up slightly, her fingers tightening around the stem of her wine glass. Bad boys, huh? Sarah said, her voice a little louder than it needed to be, a little hoarse from the wine. The ones with attitude, huh? The ones who can turn a girl on, not just sit there and nod. Mia raised an eyebrow, but nodded, apparently not noticing the implication. Well, something like that. Although I already realized that this whole image is most often a fake. I would just like someone real. Real, Sarah repeated, her lips twisting into a strange smile. She leaned back in her chair, looking at Ethan. You know, Mia, that's all very well, but the problem is that real ones are boring, both in life and in bed. Ethan felt his heart skip a beat. He turned to Sarah, trying to catch her eye, but she was looking at Mia, and there was something poisonous in her eyes. Sarah, what are you talking about? He asked quietly, hoping she was just joking, as usual. But she ignored him, her voice growing louder. I mean, Ethan, for example. She waved her hand at him, as if imagining him on stage. He's nice, sure, and dependable. Programmer and all that. But, you know, in bed he's, how can I say this, too soft. Not the type to really turn you on, you know. And well, to be honest, she giggled, but there was no warmth in her laugh. His size isn't particularly impressive. He's not the bad boy I might have once dreamed of. The room was dead silent. Glasses froze in hands, forks stopped clicking on plates. Ethan felt the blood rush to his face, then suddenly drain away, leaving him with the feeling that he had been struck. He stared at Sarah, unable to force out a word, his throat tight with shame. The guests were awkwardly silent. Tom cleared his throat, Lisa stared at her plate, Laura opened her mouth, but then closed it. Across from him, Mia froze, her eyes widened in shock. Ethan clenched his fists under the table, trying to keep his composure. He wanted to say something, to argue, to make a joke to lighten the mood, but the words stuck. Sarah, still smiling, took a sip of wine, as if she hadn't noticed that she had just broken it in front of everyone. And in that silence, under the gaze of his friends, Ethan felt naked, humiliated, as if he had just been stripped naked in public. The silence in the Browns' dining room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Sarah's words still hung in the air, venomous and sharp as shards of glass. Ethan sat staring at the table, his face flushed with humiliation, his knuckles white on the edge of the tablecloth. The guests were silent, unsure of where to look. Lisa fiddling with her napkin, Tom coughing awkwardly, Laura staring at Sarah with her mouth open. Sarah herself, still holding her glass of wine, seemed pleased, as if her tirade had been a good joke. And then Mia, who was sitting opposite, abruptly pushed her chair back, making a scraping sound on the wooden floor. Her dark eyes were sparkling, her cheeks slightly flushed, either from wine or anger. Seriously, Sarah, her voice was low, but there was a steel ring to it. You're just going to dump him like this? Humiliate him in front of everyone? That's a great move. Sarah blinked, her smile faltering, but she tried to keep her face straight. Oh, come on, Mia, it's just a joke. Relax. Ethan knows I'm not serious. A joke? Mia narrowed her eyes, leaning forward. No, Sarah, this is not a joke. This is disgusting. And since you've decided to play dirty, let me say a few words too. Ethan looked up, his heart beating faster. He felt something shift in the air, like before lightning struck. Mia looked straight at Sarah, her lips curling into a cold smile. You know, from my experience with Ethan, the problem isn't his size. She emphasized the last word, almost spitting it out. So forget your small caliber myths. What if the target is too big, huh? Maybe it's not him, but you? The room exploded into silence, even more deafening than before. The guests' eyes widened and their jaws dropped. Laura choked on her wine, Jack froze with his fork in his hand, and Lisa gasped softly. Ethan felt his stomach clench. Mia's words, her allusion to their old connection, a brief college fling that no one but the two of them knew about, hit him like a slap in the face. He looked at Mia, then at Sarah, who had gone pale, her hand shaking as she held her glass. What did you say? Sarah hissed, her voice full of venom, but also laced with uncertainty. You heard, Mia snapped, not looking away. Stop throwing shit at him. If you have a problem, deal with yourself. Don't make a big deal out of it. Ethan couldn't breathe. The humiliation of Sarah's words mixed with the shock of Mia's revelation, and his mind seemed to shut down. He watched the guests exchange glances. Laura tried to speak, but found no words. Sarah opened her mouth to respond, but Ethan was no longer listening. He stood up abruptly, his chair creaking, and walked toward the door without looking at anyone. "Ethan, where are you going?" Sarah called, but her voice sounded uncertain, almost guilty. He didn't answer. Humiliation, anger, shame, all of it mixed in his chest, pressing like a concrete slab. He couldn't stay here, couldn't bear the looks of his friends or the poisonous spectacle that had just unfolded. The door slammed behind him, and the cold Chicago air hit him in the face as he stepped out onto the porch. Ethan walked down the steps without looking back, Sarah's words swirling in his head. All he knew was that he had to go. Far away. Now. He walked to the car parked outside the house and got behind the wheel without even turning on the ignition. His hands were still shaking, and there was a lump in his throat. Ethan got home around midnight, when the streets of Oak Park were already quiet. He sat for hours in his car, parked outside a 24-hour diner a few miles away, staring into space and sipping cold coffee. The shame of Sarah's words and the shock of Mia's outburst still burned, but he hoped the guests had left and Sarah was probably asleep. He didn't want to talk, not now, with his nerves on edge. But when he opened the door and saw the light in the living room, he knew there was no way around it. Sarah sat on the couch, her arms crossed, her dark hair disheveled, and the dress she had worn at dinner now wrinkled. An empty bottle of wine sat on the coffee table, along with a glass of half-empty red wine. She looked up as Ethan entered, and her expression hardened. "Finally," she said, her voice hoarse and sarcastic. "I thought you were going to sleep in the car." Ethan silently took off his jacket and hung it on the hook, trying to keep his temper in check. He could feel the anger that had been building all evening rising in his throat, but he still hoped that he could just go upstairs and go to bed. "Where were you?" Sarah continued, getting up from the couch. "Did you just run off like a child and leave me to deal with this mess? Everyone was talking about you slamming the door. Mia left right after you, by the way. Great evening, Ethan, bravo." He stopped, turning to face her. His voice was quiet, but there was a steel ring in it. "Are you serious? You want to talk about how I ruined everything, after what you said, in front of everyone?" Sarah rolled her eyes and waved her hand. "Oh, come on, it was a joke. Just a stupid joke, Ethan. You've always been okay with it. What now you suddenly decide to take offense? A joke?" He stepped closer, his voice growing louder. "You humiliated me in front of our friends, Sarah. Call me. Hell, I don't even want to repeat what you said, and you call that a joke." "God, you're so sensitive." She crossed her arms, her tone full of irritation. "It was just a conversation. I was teasing you, like always. You know I didn't mean it, and you made a big deal out of it, ran away like I betrayed you." Ethan clenched his fists, feeling the blood pounding in his temples. "Not seriously? You said that I'm not a man, that I can't." He faltered, the words burning his tongue. "You said it in front of Laura, in front of Mia, in front of everyone. And you think I should just laugh and forget?" Sarah snorted, but her gaze hardened. "Should I keep quiet? Maybe if you were a little, I don't know, tougher, more confident, I wouldn't joke. But you're always so soft, Ethan. Always agreeing, always apologizing. Sometimes I wish you were different." Her words hit him like a slap, and Ethan felt something break in his chest. He looked at her, the wife he had shared 5 years with, and he didn't recognize her. But the worst part was that she didn't stop. "You know what?" Sarah continued, her voice shaking with anger and guilt. "Maybe if you had, I wouldn't have had to look elsewhere. Yeah, Ethan, I cheated on you. With Nick, from work, a couple months ago. Because you just couldn't handle it." The room seemed to shrink. Ethan froze, his mind refusing to accept her words. Cheating. Nick. A couple months ago. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. His world, already in tatters since dinner, began to crumble like a house of cards. "What did you say?" he finally managed, his voice hoarse, almost alien. Sarah, as if realizing that she had gone too far, covered her mouth with her hand, but immediately lowered it, straightening up. You heard. I didn't want it to happen, but it did. And you know what? I don't regret it because you didn't give me what I needed. Ethan looked at her, a mixture of pain, disbelief, and rage in his eyes. He wanted to scream, wanted to ask how she could, but the words died in his throat. Instead, he turned, grabbed the jacket he'd just hung up, and headed for the door. "Ethan, wait!" Sarah cried, her voice now full of panic. "We can talk. I didn't mean to." But he wasn't listening anymore. The door slammed behind him, and he was back on the cold porch, his breath puffing out into the night air. He walked to his car, got behind the wheel, and started the engine, not thinking about where he was going. In his head there was only one thing going on. She was cheating with Nick. And all this time she was laughing at him, humiliating him, knowing that he was not the one she needed. Ethan drove through the empty streets until he reached a nondescript hotel on the outskirts of town. He checked into a room, threw his bag on the bed, and collapsed into a chair. Ethan lay on the hard bed in his hotel room, staring at the ceiling, where the dim light from the lamp cast shadows from the cheap shade. The clock on his bedside table said 3 in the morning, but sleep would not come. His mind was like a broken record, replaying the events of the dinner over and over. Sarah's venomous words, Mia's shocking outburst, and then her confession of cheating on him with Nick. Each word burned like a hot iron, but worst of all was the feeling that everything he had believed had been a lie. He rolled over, looking down at his phone, face down. He hadn't checked it since he'd left home. But the past was still there. He remembered the years of putting up with her teasing, jokes about his clumsy attempts at fixing things around the house, teasing him about his boring job as a programmer. He'd always thought it was just her way, that it was how she showed love, through sarcasm and gentle jabs. But now, after her words at dinner and her confession of infidelity, he saw it differently. It wasn't love. It was disdainful. Ethan reached for his phone and turned on the screen. Several missed calls from Sarah, 2 from Laura, and 1 message from Emily, Sarah's friend. He frowned as he opened the chat. Emily rarely messaged him directly, and her message, sent an hour ago, began without preamble. "Ethan, I'm so sorry. You need to see this." The text was followed by screenshots of the correspondence, a long chain of messages between Emily and Sarah. He began to read, his heart clenching with each word. In messages dating back several months, Sarah had ridiculed him. "Ethan was whining again about me pushing too hard," she wrote in one of them. As if he even knew what pressure was. In bed, it was the same thing, no spark, just routine. In another, honestly, sometimes I regret marrying him. He's so weak. I don't know how he even thinks he can satisfy me. There were more intimate details, 2 derogatory comments about his body, his insecurities, how he was trying but not making it. In one of her final messages, Sarah wrote, "Nick was a mistake, but damn, at least someone reminded me that I was alive." Ethan dropped the phone on the bed, his hands shaking. He felt a sickness building in his chest, mixed with anger and pain. This wasn't just cheating. Sarah hadn't just slept with Nick. She'd spent years talking about him behind his back, making fun of everything he thought was private and intimate between them. Every moment of intimacy, every time he thought they were close, it had all been an act. She'd pretended, smiled at him, slept with him, but deep down she despised him, and all the while he'd been blind. But one question tormented him more than anything. Why? If he wasn't right for her, if she didn't respect him so much, why did she stay? Why did she marry him, buy a house with him, build a life with him? Ethan closed his eyes, trying to remember their early years. Sarah had been different then, or so it seemed. She'd laughed at his jokes, supported him when he doubted himself. Or was that a game too? Maybe she wanted the stability he gave her, a good income, a comfortable home, a predictable life. And he, like a fool, had mistaken her sarcasm for love, her coldness for weariness. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the empty hotel parking lot. Memories swirled in his head, how Sarah had once jokingly said that he was not the type to surprise her, or how she had brushed him off when he suggested going on vacation because he wouldn't have the guts to do anything interesting anyway. He'd tolerated it, thinking that it was just how she was abrupt but loving. Now he saw the truth. She had never respected him, and perhaps she had never loved him. Ethan walked back to the bed and picked up his phone again. He reread the screenshots, each word branded into his memory. He wanted to text Emily to ask why she had decided to show him this, but instead he simply replied, "Thanks for showing me." Then he locked the screen and lay down, but sleep never came. His mind was full of unanswered questions, his heart full of pain from which there was no escape. All he knew was that the woman he trusted, the woman he loved, was a stranger. Ethan spent 3 days in the hotel, in the same room with beige walls and the smell of cheap air freshener. He didn't turn on the TV, didn't go beyond the nearby cafe for coffee and sandwiches, and barely slept. His phone was flashing with notifications, dozens of missed calls from Sarah, apologetic texts that began with, "Ethan, please talk to me," and ended with, "You're being a child." He didn't answer. Every word she said, every call, only drove the knife deeper, reminding him of her betrayal, of the screenshots of her mocking him, of how she'd humiliated him in front of everyone. During the day, he sat by the window, looking out at the parking lot, replaying their marriage in his head. Memories that had once seemed warm now seemed different. The way Sarah had jokingly called him weak when he tried to open a jar of pickles. The way she'd rolled her eyes when he'd suggested they go hiking, saying he was not the adventurous type. Or the way she'd once said coolly, "Oh, okay, I guess," after they'd been intimate. He'd always chalked it up to her personality, to stress, to anything but the truth. She didn't respect him, and maybe she'd never loved him. By the morning of the third day, Ethan felt he couldn't hide in the room any longer, but he also couldn't go home to Sarah. He opened the laptop he'd grabbed from the car and began searching for Chicago divorce lawyers. His fingers shook as he typed, but with each click, his resolve grew. He couldn't continue living with a man who had betrayed him not just in body, but in soul. The betrayal with Nick was just one part. The screenshots, her words over dinner, her constant teasing, it was all a betrayal that had stretched out over years. Ethan chose a lawyer with good reviews, made an appointment for the following week, and closed his laptop. He stood up, walked to the bathroom mirror, and looked at himself. Dark circles under his eyes, stubble, a tired look. But in that reflection, he saw more than just pain. He saw a man who had finally decided to choose himself. He picked up his phone and blocked Sarah's number. It was a first step, small but important. Then he wrote a short message to Laura, "I'm fine. Need some advice. Call me tomorrow." He wasn't ready to tell everything, but he knew his sister would understand. The answer came almost immediately, "Sure, Ethan. I'm here. Call when you're ready." Ethan sat down on the bed, his gaze falling on the wedding ring on his finger. He slowly removed it, feeling something inside him release. 5 years of marriage, a house in Oak Park, plans for the future, it was all with Sarah, but not for her. She had destroyed their world, and he had no intention of rebuilding it. The decision to leave, to end the marriage, was not simply a response to pain, it was a choice to live without the lies, without the humiliation, without a woman who saw him as a convenient crutch, not a partner. He put the ring on the nightstand, gathered his things, and left the room. There were hard days ahead, talks with a lawyer, dividing up the property, explaining things to friends. But for the first time in a long time, Ethan felt like he could breathe more freely. He didn't know what was coming next, but he knew one thing. He wouldn't go back to Sarah. Ever. Ethan parked his car outside his Oak Park home, his stomach clenching with tension. It was Wednesday morning, and he had come to pick up his things, his clothes, his laptop, a few personal items. After 4 days in a hotel, he had finally worked up the courage to meet Sarah face to face. His lawyer was already preparing the divorce papers, and Ethan was determined that this would be his last visit. He didn't want a long conversation, didn't want her excuses. Just get what was his and go. He entered the house using his key and immediately smelled coffee mixed with something sweet. It seemed she was baking. Sarah was sitting on the living room couch, wearing an old sweater and jeans, her hair pulled back into a messy ponytail. When she saw him, she jumped up, her eyes red, as if she had been crying. "Ethan," her voice wavered, and she took a step toward him. "Thank you for coming. I wanted to talk. I'm so sorry, I really did. I didn't mean for it to turn out this way." Ethan raised his hand to stop her, his face stony, his voice cold as ice. "No need, Sarah. That's not why I'm here. I came for my things." She froze, her lips trembling, but she tried to continue. "Please, just listen. I know I said some terrible things, and about Nick, it was a mistake, Ethan. One time, I swear, I was angry, I was drunk, I—" "Shut your filthy mouth," he snapped, his voice harsh but firm, without a hint of hesitation. "You've said enough. I don't want to hear your excuses." Sarah recoiled, her eyes wide with shock. Ethan pulled his phone out of his pocket and opened the screenshots of her and Emily's text messages she'd sent him. He turned the screen toward her, showing her the messages where she'd made fun of him, his body, his insecurities. "This," he said, his voice shaking with suppressed anger, but he kept it together. "This is what you thought of me. For years. You lied to my face, slept with me, made plans, and then talked shit about me behind my back. And you dare say it was a mistake?" Sarah opened her mouth, but the words stuck. She stared at the screen, her face turning pale, and then she covered her mouth with her hand, as if trying to hold back tears. "Ethan, I didn't mean for you to see that," she muttered. "It was stupid. I was just angry. Enough." He stepped closer, his gaze so hard that she involuntarily stepped back. "You humiliated me in front of everyone, cheated on me, and now you're trying to pretend that it didn't matter? Do you think I'm such a weakling that I'll swallow this and stay? No, Sarah. I'm a man, I have dignity, and I'm not going to live with a man who despises me." She sniffled, her tears flowing freely now, but Ethan didn't flinch. He could see her pain, but it didn't touch him anymore. All he felt was cold determination and a strange relief that he was finally saying what he should have said years ago. "I'm filing for divorce," he said, his voice as flat as a sentence. "My lawyer is already preparing the paperwork. We're not a family anymore, Sarah. You ruined it." "Ethan, please." She reached out, trying to touch him, but he stepped back, shaking his head. "Don't you dare. I came for my things, that's all." He walked past her into the bedroom, ignoring her quiet sobs. In their room, he quickly packed a suitcase, a few shirts, jeans, a laptop, a charger, and a couple of books. He didn't look at the photos on the nightstand, didn't linger on the memories. This place wasn't his home anymore. When he was done, he returned to the living room, where Sarah was still standing, her arms wrapped around herself, her face wet with tears. "Ethan," her voice was barely audible. "I love you. I didn't mean to." "You don't love me," he snapped, his gaze hard but not angry, just empty. "You loved comfort, the house, my salary, but not me. Goodbye, Sarah." He turned and walked out without looking back. The door closed behind him with a soft click, and he heard Sarah start to sob, but it didn't matter anymore. Ethan threw his suitcase in the trunk, got behind the wheel, and drove away, feeling the heavy weight he'd carried for years finally lifted off his shoulders. He was free not from the pain, but from her, and that was enough. Ethan sat in the corner of the Rusty Anchor, an old downtown Chicago bar that smelled of spilled beer and fried potatoes. The neon lights outside reflected off his barely touched pint of ale. It had been a week since he'd left home, taking his things and leaving Sarah in tears. He'd rented a small apartment downtown, but was living in a hotel while he waited for his furniture to be delivered. His life, which had seemed stable until recently, was now chaotic, but he'd agreed to meet Tom and Jack today. He needed something familiar to keep him from going crazy. The bar was full of the Friday crowd, college students laughing at the pool table, a couple arguing in the corner, and a bartender wiping glasses with a tired expression. Ethan chose a table away from the noise, but he still felt out of place. He wasn't sure he was ready to talk about what had happened, but Tom insisted on meeting, writing, "Grab a beer, we'll figure it out." Jack also confirmed that he would come, and Ethan, although he was reluctant, agreed. Maybe his friends would help him come to his senses a little. Tom walked in first, his red beard standing out even in the dim light of the bar. He spotted Ethan, waved, and headed toward the table, carrying 2 beers. "Here you go," he said, setting one down in front of Ethan. "Your ale looks like you ordered it an hour ago and forgot to drink it." Ethan smiled weakly, pushing away his old pint. I I don't really want to." "I see." Tom sat down across from her, his usually cheerful tone subdued. "But at least tell me how you are, man. Jack and I were worried. You disappeared after that dinner." Ethan shrugged, looking at the table. "Alive. For now, just trying to figure it out." Before Tom could respond, Jack walked into the bar, his dark jacket slightly damp from the drizzle. He shook the rain out of his hair and joined them, glancing quickly at Ethan. "You look like crap," he said bluntly, but there was genuine concern in his voice. "What's going on? Are you okay?" Ethan took a deep breath, feeling the words he'd been holding inside spill out. He didn't want to go into detail, but he knew Tom and Jack had been at the table that night. They'd heard Sarah's humiliating words, seen Mia spill their secret, and likely already knew about her confession of infidelity. Rumors traveled fast in their circle. "It's not okay," he finally said, his voice quiet but firm. "Sarah, she cheated on me with some Nick from work a couple months ago, and this was after she humiliated me in front of all of you." Tom whistled, leaning back in his chair. "Damn, I knew that night was shitty, but cheating? Seriously?" Jack frowned, his fingers tightening around his glass. "I heard from Emily that there was something there, but I thought it was just gossip." "She really told you that? To your face?" Ethan nodded, his gaze fixed on his pint. "Yes, after I left home. She screamed that I couldn't cope, that she wanted someone else. And then I found out that she'd been talking about me behind my back for years, making fun of me. Everything I thought was personal, she'd share it with her friends like I was some kind of joke." Tom shook his head, his face darkening. "It's just low. I always thought Sarah was a bit harsh, but this is beyond the pale. How do you even cope with this?" Ethan smiled bitterly, looking up for the first time that evening. "Nothing. I just live. I filed for divorce. Already hired a lawyer. I'm not going to go back." Jack nodded, his expression serious. "The right decision. Honestly, I've noticed for a long time that she was teasing you, but I thought it was just your style. Now it's clear that it wasn't just jokes. She was toxic, Ethan. For years." "Yeah," Ethan said quietly, feeling Jack's words confirm what he was beginning to understand. "I just didn't want to see it. I thought if I stuck it out, if I tried, I don't know, change, but she never respected me." Tom leaned closer, his voice full of sympathy. "Look, it's not your fault she's like this. You were a good husband. Home, work, you did everything for her, and she just used you. And you know what? You deserve better. Much better." Ethan felt a lump in his throat, but he swallowed it, sipping his beer to hide his emotions. Tom's words were simple, but they struck a chord. For the first time in a week, he felt like he wasn't alone. The 2 men sitting across from him weren't judging him, laughing, or dismissing him. They were on his side. "Thank you," he said, his voice a little hoarse. "Really, I just don't know how to sort this out. Everything with Sarah, it's like it's not my life." Jack placed his hand on his shoulder, his grip firm but warm. "You'll figure it out, step by step. Divorce is shit, but it's better than living with someone who betrays you. And we're here, if anything. If you want, we can drink beer and scold Sarah. If you want, we can help you move. Just say the word." Ethan smiled weakly, feeling a slight sense of relief for the first time that evening. "Enough beer for now, but I'll remember." They sat for another hour, the conversation gradually moving to other topics. Tom talking about his new project at work, Jack complaining about Chicago traffic. Ethan listened, occasionally chiming in, and it was almost like the old days, like those nights they'd gather at the bar without drama. But deep down, he still felt empty, like a part of him was still stuck in the house he'd left. As Tom went to order more beer, Ethan's phone vibrated. It was Laura. He hesitated, but answered. Ethan, her voice was soft but worried. Thank God you picked up. I called a couple of days ago, but you didn't answer. Are you? Are you okay? Hi, Laura, he said, trying to sound calmer than he felt. I'm fine, just busy. How are you? Honestly, I'm worried about you, she sighed. Look, I wanted to apologize for that night. For Mia, well, for everything. I didn't expect things to turn out this way. It was terrible. Ethan closed his eyes, the memories of Mia and Sarah's words coming back to him. Yeah, it was not the best evening, but it's not your fault. It's Sarah and, well, everything else. I know, Laura paused, her voice growing quieter. Ethan, I heard from Emily about the cheating, and about what Sarah said behind your back. I'm shocked. I always thought she was just being harsh, but this is just mean. I'm sorry I didn't notice before. Nobody noticed, he said, his voice tired. Not even me. I thought it was just her way, but it turns out she just hated me. She didn't hate you, Laura said softly. She just, I don't know, Ethan. Maybe she's at odds with herself. But it's not your fault. And you know what? She's losing friends. Emily doesn't talk to her anymore, and neither does Lisa. People see her for who she really is. And you were always better than she deserved. Ethan felt his eyes sting, but he blinked back the tears. His sister's words were a balm, but they also reminded him of how long he'd ignored the truth. He'd tolerated Sarah's teasing, her coldness, her disdain, thinking it was okay, that he should try harder. And in the end, he'd been left heartbroken and empty. Thank you, Laura, he said, his voice hoarse. I appreciate it. I really do. It's just, I need some time to process all of this. Sure, she said. But I'm here, okay? If you want to talk, or just have pizza like old times, call. And, Ethan, you can do it. You're stronger than you think. I'll try, he said, and there was a shadow of a smile in his voice. Good night, Laura. Calm down, she replied, and the connection was cut off. Ethan put the phone down on the table, feeling the fatigue wash over him. Tom had returned with the beer, and Jack was already telling a story about his boss, but Ethan was only half listening. He was grateful for Tom, for Jack, for Laura, for their support, keeping him from drowning. But deep down, he still felt empty. The knowledge that he had spent years with a woman who disrespected him, who had lied to him and betrayed him, was like an open wound. And the worst part was that he had allowed it to happen, ignoring the signs that now seemed obvious. Hey, you with us? Tom nudged him, breaking him out of his thoughts. Yeah, Ethan forced a smile. Just thinking. I understand, Tom said, his eyes serious. But you know what? You got out. You left. That's a victory, and it'll get easier from here. Ethan nodded, but deep down he knew that easier was still a long way off. He raised his glass, clinking it with his friends, and took a sip. The beer was cold, bitter, and for a second he felt like he could breathe. He was devastated, but not broken. And with his friends by his side, with their support, he began to believe that he could move forward, one step at a time. Ethan sat in his lawyer's office, a small space in downtown Chicago that smelled of paper and coffee. The walls were covered with diplomas, and at a desk piled high with folders sat Linda Cross, a woman in her 50s with a sharp eye and a businesslike manner. She leafed through the documents Ethan had handed her at their last meeting. The marriage license, the marital property statements, his notes on the division of the Oak Park house. This was their second consultation, and today he would sign the papers that would officially begin the divorce. Everything looks fine, Linda said, adjusting her glasses. We've prepared a notice of divorce and a request for property division. I suggest we send it to Sarah via courier to avoid personal contact. Are you sure you don't want to negotiate directly? Ethan shook his head, his fingers tightening around the pen lying on the table. No, I don't want to talk to her. Everything is through you. Linda nodded, not asking any questions. Her professional reserve was something Ethan liked. No sympathetic looks, just business. Okay? We'll send the paperwork today. If she hires a lawyer, we'll start negotiating terms. If not, the court will schedule a hearing. In any case, given the infidelity and the lack of children, the process should be relatively straightforward. The house is the main complication, but we can insist on a sale and equal division. Ethan nodded, his stomach clenching at the mention of home. That house in Oak Park that he and Sarah had chosen together was now just an asset in a legal document. He signed the papers, his signature looking foreign, but with each stroke he felt like he was cutting another thread to his past. "Thank you, Linda," he said, standing up. "Keep me informed." "Of course," she said, holding out her hand. "And Ethan, if she has any questions or tries to contact me, direct her to me. You've done the right thing." He smiled weakly and walked out of the office, feeling a strange mixture of relief and emptiness. There was a cold wind blowing outside, and Ethan zipped up his jacket as he headed to his car. The paperwork had been sent, which meant that Sarah would soon be receiving official notice. He imagined her reaction, tears, anger, maybe trying to call, but it no longer affected him. He was firm in his decision. No communication without lawyers. She had ruined their marriage, and he wasn't going to give her the chance to manipulate him again. 2 days later, Ethan moved into a new apartment in downtown Chicago, small but bright, with views of skyscrapers and bustling streets. The furniture was minimal: a bed, a couch, a table, and a couple of chairs that had been delivered the day before. He unpacked his suitcase, hung his clothes in the closet, and set his laptop on the table. It wasn't home, but it was his without the memories of Sarah, without her sarcastic jabs, without the pain. Work became his anchor. He spent 10 hours a day in the tech company's office, immersed in code, meetings, and new project plans. His promotion to lead developer meant more responsibility, and he took on everything that was offered. When his boss mentioned another business trip to California, Ethan, to his surprise, agreed without hesitation. Before, these trips had seemed like a burden, another source of tension with Sarah, who grumbled about his absence. Now they were his salvation. Days in Silicon Valley, filled with meetings, coding, and dinners with colleagues, gave him a chance to distract himself from thoughts of betrayal. That evening, back at his apartment, Ethan opened his laptop and checked his email. Among his work emails was a message from Linda. "The documents have been delivered. Sarah has received notification. Her lawyer has contacted us. Negotiations will begin next week." Ethan closed the letter, feeling a slight tension. "Let's go." Everything was going according to plan. Sarah could cry, scream, or try to prove something, but that was no longer his concern. Ethan pushed open the heavy wooden door of the Green Lantern pub and was immediately enveloped by the buzz of conversations, the clink of glasses, and the smell of hops. It was Friday, the end of the work week, and he had agreed to go for a few pints with some colleagues from the IT company. Since moving into a new apartment and the beginning of his divorce, he had rarely ventured out outside of work, but today he had been persuaded by Mike, one of the developers, who swore that beer cures everything. Ethan was not a big believer, but he did not want to sit in an empty apartment. The pub was packed. Office workers in unbuttoned shirts, students with laptops, a couple of old guys at the bar arguing about baseball. Ethan made his way to a table in the corner where Mike, Liz from marketing, and two other people from their team were already sitting. They ordered their first round of beers, and the conversation quickly turned to work stories, about a bug in the code that almost brought down the server, and about the boss who was again demanding innovation without a budget. Ethan was half listening, sipping his IPA, when his gaze fell on the bar. Mia was standing there, a glass of whiskey in her hand. Her dark hair was down, her leather jacket slung casually over the back of a stool. She was laughing as she talked to the bartender, and her smile was so familiar that Ethan froze for a second. He hadn't seen her since that ill-fated dinner, when her words about their past had derailed the evening, and he wasn't sure he wanted to see her now. But she had already noticed him. "Ethan," Mia narrowed her eyes, her voice cutting through the noise of the pub. She waved her hand, inviting him to come closer. Are you hiding from me? The colleagues turned around. Mike raised an eyebrow. An old friend? He asked with a grin. Something like that, Ethan muttered, feeling his cheeks warm. He stood up, saying, I'll just be a minute, and headed for the counter. Mia greeted him with a wide smile, but there was a slight wariness in her eyes. Well, hello, she said, taking a sip of whiskey. I didn't think I'd see you in a place like this. You're a busy programmer now, aren't you? Ethan smiled weakly, leaning against the counter. Just drinking with colleagues. What are you doing here? Oh, I'm a regular now, she nodded at the bartender, who winked at her. Just kidding. Just came in to unwind after work. New city, new life, all that. Ethan nodded, unsure of what to say. Their last meeting had ended in chaos, and her words about the target still echoed in his head. But standing there, looking at her warm smile, he felt strangely relieved. Mia had always been straightforward, and despite her awkwardness, she was easy to be around. Look, she began, her tone growing serious. I wanted to apologize for the other night. You know, for blurting it out. I couldn't keep quiet when Sarah was trashing you like that, but I probably made it worse. Ethan shook his head, looking away. It's not your fault. Sarah ruined everything herself. And, well, thanks for standing up for me. Although, damn, that was unexpected. Mia laughed, her sound hoarse but genuine. Yeah, I'm a master of surprises. Okay, let's have a drink to forget that nightmare. What are you drinking? IPA, he replied, and she immediately ordered 2 glasses, ignoring his objections. They clinked glasses, and Ethan felt some of the tension he'd been carrying around for weeks. Mia began talking about her new job at a logistics company and how she was trying to adjust to the Chicago winters after Germany. Ethan, to his surprise, found himself drawn into the conversation, reminiscing about their college days when he, Mia, and Sarah would spend hours arguing about music or movies. Remember when we snuck into that Radiohead concert? Mia said, her eyes shining with recollection. You almost fell off the fence and Sarah was screaming that we were going to be arrested. Ethan laughed, feeling lighter for the first time in a long time. Yeah, and then you convinced the guard to let us through because you have connections. You've always been, I don't know, fearless. Fearless or reckless, she corrected, winking. But you were nothing special either. Always helped me out, even when I got into trouble. They ordered another pint, then moved on to whiskey, and time began to slip away. Ethan's colleagues had long since left, leaving him with a note, Don't disappear, rock star. The pub was getting noisier, but for Ethan the world had narrowed to Mia, her laughter, her stories, her gaze, which he thought was growing warmer. The alcohol had loosened their tongues, and they chatted about the past, about how things had changed, avoiding the subject of Sarah, but feeling her shadow somewhere in the periphery. You know, Mia said, when they were on their 3rd whiskey, I always thought you deserved better. Even back in college, you were real. And Sarah, she always wanted things her way. Ethan looked at her, his thoughts clouded by alcohol, but her words struck a chord. I didn't see it, he said quietly. I thought she was just being harsh. But it turns out I don't know, she hated me. Mia shook her head, her hand coming to rest on his wrist. She didn't hate you, Ethan. She just didn't see you for what you were. But I did, and I still see you. Her touch was warm, and Ethan felt something shift inside him. He looked into her eyes, and in that moment the pub, the noise, everything else disappeared. It was just the two of them, and the memories, and something new that was being born in this drunken but honest moment. He wasn't thinking when he leaned in and kissed her. Mia responded, her lips soft and whiskey-flavored, like a breath after being underwater for so long. They left the pub, laughing and stumbling, and caught a taxi to Ethan's flat. They kissed again in the lift, their hands tangling in their clothes, their minds too foggy to consider the consequences. They fell onto the bed in the flat, and the night became a whirlwind of passion and laughter and forgotten freedom. Ethan didn't think about Sarah or the divorce or the pain, only about Mia, her skin, her voice, the way she looked at him like he was someone important. Morning came with a headache and a harsh light filtering through the curtains. Ethan was the first to wake, Mia asleep next to him, her hair spread across the pillow. He looked at her, feeling a mixture of guilt and relief. Guilt because it had been too fast, too impulsive, after everything he had been through. Relief because for the first time in years he felt alive, wanted, free. Mia stirred, opened her eyes, and smiled, rubbing her temples. "Damn, how much did we drink last night?" she muttered, sitting up. "Your apartment, huh? Not bad, Brown." Ethan chuckled, handing her a bottle of water from the nightstand. "Welcome to my den. Would you like some coffee?" "God, yes." She sipped her water, her gaze growing serious. "Look, Ethan, about I don't regret it, but are you okay? I didn't mean for it to be, just like that." He sat down next to her, looking at the floor. The question caught him off guard, but he knew he had to be honest. "I don't regret it either," he said slowly. "But, damn, Mia, it's all so complicated. Sarah, the divorce, all of it. I don't know if I'm ready for something new." Mia nodded, her face soft and non-judgmental. "I understand, and I'm not going to rush you. But do you know why I snapped at Sarah that night at dinner? I knew she was lying. You're really good in bed." Mia smiled, touching his hand. "You were always cool, Ethan. You just needed a reminder." They drank coffee, chatted about trivialities, and Mia left, leaving her number and a light kiss goodbye. Ethan stood in the empty apartment, feeling guilt and a new, forgotten sense of freedom warring within him. A night with Mia was not the answer to all his questions, but she was a spark, a reminder that he could live, feel, be someone other than the husband Sarah despised. And with that, he was ready to move on, even if he didn't yet know where. Ethan stood at the window of his downtown Chicago apartment, looking out at the lights of the skyscrapers that twinkled in the night sky. It had been a month since that drunken night at the pub, when he and Mia had succumbed to impulse and crossed the line into friendship. At the time, he hadn't been sure what would come of it. The wounds of Sarah's betrayal were too fresh, his life too chaotic. But looking back, he realized that Mia had been more than just a spark. She had become something more, a person with whom he was learning to trust again, to feel, to live. Their relationship began cautiously. Mia called a few days after that night, asking to meet for coffee. Ethan was hesitant but agreed, sensing he didn't want to lose sight of her. They sat in a small coffee shop on the corner, drinking lattes and chatting about small things, her new job in logistics, his project involving cloud services. But between jokes and reminiscing about college, the conversation inevitably led to what had happened. "I don't want to push it, Ethan," Mia had said then, stirring her coffee. Her dark eyes were direct, not playing. "You've been through hell. But I'm not Sarah, and if you want to try, I'm here." Her directness disarmed him. With Sarah, everything was always veiled. Jabs, innuendos, expectations he could never live up to. Mia was different, open, honest, unafraid to say what she thought. Ethan nodded, feeling warmth in his chest. "I want to try," he said quietly. "But slowly, okay? I'm not quite there yet." "Slow is my style," she chuckled, her smile breaking the tension. From that day on, they began dating. At first, it was dinners at inexpensive restaurants, walks along the Lake Michigan waterfront, evenings watching old movies in his apartment. Mia didn't rush things, didn't demand promises, but her presence was an anchor. She listened when he talked about work, genuinely interested, unlike Sarah, who rolled her eyes at the word code. When Ethan mentioned that his team was working on a new project for a client in California, Mia didn't just nod, she asked questions, offered ideas, even joked that he was saving the world, one server at a time. "Do you really think this is cool?" he asked one day as they sat on the couch eating pizza. "Most people think my job is boring." "Boring?" Mia raised an eyebrow, taking a bite of pepperoni. "You literally create the stuff that keeps companies afloat. It's like being a superhero, but without the cape. I'd be bragging to everyone I met if I were you." Ethan laughed, And it was easy, genuine. With Mia, for the first time in years, he felt needed, valued not for what he earned or did for anyone else, but for who he was. She respected his work, his ideas, his small victories, and it was like a breath of fresh air after years of suffocation. His career, meanwhile, was gaining momentum. 2 weeks after their first meeting, Ethan was offered another promotion to lead a team of engineers with more salary and responsibility. His boss, a burly man named Richard, slapped him on the shoulder at a meeting and said, "You've proven you can lead people, Brown. Don't let me down." Ethan didn't. He took on challenging projects, coordinated the team, and even began to enjoy the trips to California that had once seemed like a drag. There, in the bustling Silicon Valley offices, he would meet with clients, discuss strategy, and return to Chicago with new ideas. These trips, which had once caused arguments with Sarah, were now a chance to reset, to see beyond the pain of betrayal. One day, after returning from a 3-day business trip, Ethan found Mia in his apartment. She insisted she had a key to check for roaches. There was a bottle of wine on the table, and the kitchen smelled of homemade tacos. "Surprise," she said, coming out with a plate of guacamole. "I thought you were tired from the plane. Eat, and then tell me what California's like." Ethan looked at her, feeling something warm in his chest. Sarah never did anything like that. She either nagged him about leaving or ignored him when he returned. Mia was here, asking for nothing in return, simply because she wanted to be there. "You're unreal," he said, hugging her. "Thank you." "Oh, I know," she winked, but her voice was soft. "But you're okay, Brown." They ate tacos, drank wine, and talked until midnight. Mia told them about her new project at work, how her boss had tried to implement a revolutionary system that had promptly failed. Ethan shared a story about a client who wanted more AI on a project without understanding what that meant. They laughed over each other, and Ethan suddenly found himself not wanting the evening to end. With Mia, things were easy, not perfect, but honest. She didn't pretend, didn't set conditions, and with her, he felt not just like a partner, but like a person who was seen and valued. Their relationship deepened with each passing day. Mia began staying over on weekends, her toothbrush in the bathroom, a couple of her t-shirts in the closet. They hadn't discussed it formally, but Ethan didn't mind. He liked the way she filled his space, not in an intrusive way, but naturally, as if she'd always been a part of his life. One day, as they were walking through Millennium Park, Mia took his hand and said, "You know, I didn't think I'd get into a relationship again. But with you, it just works. You don't force me to be someone else." Ethan paused, looking at her. There was a sincerity in her eyes that made his heart beat faster. "I didn't think so either," he admitted. "After Sarah, I didn't believe I could trust anyone. But you're different. With you, I feel like myself." Mia smiled, squeezing his hand. "Then let's just be ourselves, okay? No drama." He nodded, and they walked on, their footsteps echoing in unison along the park path. For the first time in years, Ethan felt unafraid of the future. Mia wasn't just a fling, a temporary fix. She was becoming his partner, someone he could build something real with. His career continued to grow. After another successful project in California, Ethan was offered the chance to lead a new department focused on cybersecurity. It meant more travel, but he now saw it as an opportunity rather than a burden. New cities, new contacts, a chance to expand his horizons. Mia supported him, sending funny memes while he was away and meeting him for dinner when he returned. One day, during a video call from San Francisco, she said, "If you become a big boss, I'll demand that you take me on a business trip. I want to see how you manage these techies." "Deal," Ethan laughed. "But only if you don't start teaching them German." "Oh, I'm already preparing the phrases," she winked. Their relationship wasn't a smooth ride. Sometimes Ethan found himself waiting for a catch, a habit he'd picked up from his marriage to Sarah. When Mia canceled dinner one night because of work, he briefly panicked, thinking she was pulling away. But she called the next day, apologized, and suggested meeting for lunch. Her honesty, her willingness to talk openly, eroded his fears, and he learned to trust again. The divorce from Sarah was moving forward. The lawyer had told him that Sarah had agreed to sell the house, and the process was nearing completion. Ethan felt relief, but also a little sad not for her, but for the life he had once wanted. But with Mia by his side, that sadness was becoming quieter. She wasn't replacing Sarah, she was something new, something Ethan hadn't expected, but now didn't want to lose. One evening, as they lay in bed, Mia turned towards him, her face illuminated by the light from the street lamps. "Ethan," she said quietly, "I'm happy with you. I don't know how it happened, but I really am." He looked at her, feeling the warmth spreading through his chest. "Me too," he said, and it was true. For the first time in years, he felt what is in its place with her, with work, with yourself. Mia wasn't just a new chapter. She was a new beginning, and Ethan, holding her hand, knew he was ready to continue writing this story honestly, openly, with the love he finally deserved. Ethan sat in the corner of a coffee shop near his office, sipping black coffee and scrolling through work emails on his laptop. It had been 2 months since he'd started dating Mia, and his life was slowly settling into a new rhythm. Work, dates, the occasional evening with friends. His divorce from Sarah was almost finalized. The Oak Park house was on the market, and lawyers were finalizing the last details. Ethan tried not to think about her, but sometimes the past still caught up with him, like today when Tom walked into the shop. "Hey, Brown," Tom plopped down in the chair across from him, latte in hand. His red beard was a little longer than the last time they'd seen each other, but his smile was the same. "You look like a man who's finally had a good night's sleep." Ethan chuckled, closing his laptop. "I will try. What's wrong with you? Is your boss pushing you to meet deadlines again?" "Same as always." Tom sipped his coffee, but his gaze grew serious. "Listen, I've been, well, hearing a little bit about Sarah. Thought you might be interested." Ethan tensed, his fingers hovering over his mug. He hadn't asked about Sarah since he'd left home, and he didn't want to know, but his curiosity was piqued. "What exactly?" he asked, trying to sound indifferent. Tom sighed, scratching the back of his head. "She moved. From Oak Park. Moved to some small apartment in the north of the city, a one-room apartment, apparently. Emily said that Sarah complains to anyone who will listen to her, like life is unfair, everything is against her. Lost a bunch of friends, Emily, Lisa, even some of her co-workers stopped talking to her. Says it's because of gossip and betrayal." Ethan was silent, staring into his mug. He waited to feel something: anger, pity, maybe satisfaction, but there was only emptiness in his chest. Sarah, who had once been the center of his world, now seemed alien, like a character from an old movie he hadn't watched in a long time. "And what, she blames everyone but herself?" he asked, finally looking up. "Yeah," Tom nodded, his tone full of sarcasm. "Have you seen her posts on social media? She writes some vague quotes about toxic people and lessons from fate. Once she directly hinted that she was slandered. Not a word about her cheating on you or how she humiliated you. Everything like is the fault of others." Ethan gave a small but unamused smile. He opened his phone and, on impulse, logged into social media, which he hadn't checked in weeks. Sarah's profile was open, and her recent posts were indeed as Tom had described. Vague phrases like, "Sometimes people show their true colors and it hurts," and "I'm stronger than they think." One post, dated yesterday, read, "Injustice hurts, but I won't break." There was no apology, no admission of guilt for cheating on him with Nick, for the years of humiliation, for the screenshots of her making fun of him in front of her friends. He turned off the screen and leaned back in his chair. Tom looked at him, waiting for a reaction, but Ethan just shrugged. "Let him write whatever he wants," he said, his voice even, almost indifferent. "It's not my problem anymore." Tom raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised. "Seriously? You're not even angry. I'd be furious if I were you." Ethan shook his head, looking out the window at the people walking by in the drizzling rain. "I used to be angry, for weeks on end. But now, I don't care. She can blame the whole world, but it won't change what she did. I don't want to waste another minute on her. Tom nodded, his gaze softening. I get it. And it's cool. You're really moving on. Did you hear from Laura that you and Mia are officially together now? She says you're like teenagers, together all the time. Ethan smiled, genuinely this time. The mention of Mia brought warmth to his chest. She was his rock, his laugh, his new beginning. Yesterday they had walked along the boardwalk, eating hot dogs and arguing over which Tarantino movie was better. With her, he felt alive, not the shadow he had been with Sarah. Yeah, he said. Mia, she's different. She's easy. Honest. Good for you, dude. Tom raised his glass in a playful toast. Here's to a new life, free of toxic exes. Ethan clinked his mug with him, but his mind was elsewhere. He was thinking about Sarah, sitting in her small apartment, writing blog posts and complaining about injustice. 6 months ago, he would have tried to understand her, justify her, and find the reason for her pain. But now he saw it clearly. The man who had destroyed their marriage refused to take responsibility and was losing everything he had. And there was not a drop of his fault. She and Tom chatted for another half hour, discussing work and plans for the weekend. 6 months later, Ethan stood in a San Francisco hotel conference room, adjusting his tie in front of a mirrored wall. His reflection looked confident, dark suit, neatly coiffed hair, easy smile that no longer seemed forced. He just finished a presentation at a tech conference where his team had pitched a new cybersecurity project that had received rave reviews from clients. His career was at its peak. A recent promotion to department head had made him a key player at the company, and business travel, once a stressful experience, was now an opportunity to shine. But work wasn't all on his mind today. In the room, among his colleagues and partners, was Mia, who'd flown in with him to support him. Ethan found her at the bar, chatting with one of the developers, a glass of white wine in hand. Her dark hair was pulled back into a loose bun, and her black dress accentuated her confident but warm demeanor. She smiled when she saw him, and Ethan felt his heart skip a beat. Over the past 6 months, Mia had become more than just his girlfriend. She was his partner, his rock, the person he could be himself with. So, star of the conference, she winked as he approached. I heard that guy from Oracle whispering that your team would change the market. Are you proud? Ethan chuckled, taking a glass of water from the bar. I'm proud, but I'm not arrogant. Without a team, nothing would have happened. And what about you? Weren't you bored there, among all those techies? Bored? Mia laughed, her voice warm. I stole a couple of ideas from my work. And by the way, your colleague Mike tried to teach me how to code over cocktails. I think I failed the exam. Ethan smiled, feeling her ease the last of the tension. He was still getting used to how naturally she fit into his world. With Sarah, such events would be filled with teasing or cold silence. She hated his work events, calling them boring geek gatherings. Mia was different. She was genuinely interested, asking questions, making jokes, and her presence made everything better. They took a selfie in front of the conference banner. Ethan in a suit, Mia with a playful smile on her face, leaning against his shoulder. He later posted the photo on social media, a rare move for him, but he wanted to share the moment. The caption was simple, with the best support in the world. By the morning, the post had collected dozens of likes and comments from friends. Laura wrote, "You are gorgeous." Tom added, "Brown, you're now officially a lucky man." And Emily left a heart emoji. Ethan read them, feeling the warmth of support from his loved ones. His life, which had been falling apart a year ago, was now full of light. Back in Chicago, Ethan and Mia spent the weekend in his apartment, which had become their shared space over the months. Her books were on the shelf next to his, her favorite yogurt was always in the fridge, and on the couch was a blanket she'd swiped from her apartment. They cooked dinner spaghetti with pesto, laughing when Mia accidentally spilled the sauce on the counter. Ethan looked at her wild hair and easy smile, and knew he was in love. Not with an image, not with an idea, but with her honesty, her strength, her ability to make every day better. What? She asked, catching his eye. Is there sauce on my face? No, He shook his head, smiling. It's just, you make me happy. You know that? Mia froze, her eyes softening. She stepped closer, hugging him. And you me, she said quietly, and I'm not going to let it go. Their relationship wasn't perfect, they argued sometimes, like the time Ethan forgot to call to tell him he'd be home late from a business trip, or when Mia insisted that the cat she wanted to adopt wouldn't chew on his cables. But these little things were resolved by talking, not by silence or sarcasm. With Mia, Ethan felt heard and valued for the first time, and it was a new, almost frightening sensation. His friends had become an integral part of this new life. Tom and Jack regularly invited him to the bar, where they discussed everything from football to his divorce, which had been finalized a month earlier. The house in Oak Park had sold, and Ethan had taken his share, which he had put toward savings and renovating the apartment. Laura came over on weekends, bringing homemade cookies and stories about her work in marketing. She had once said, "You're different now, Ethan. Not the same as you were with Sarah. You're free." And he knew she was right. One day, at dinner with Tom and Jack, the conversation turned to Sarah. Tom, as usual, did not hold his tongue. "I heard she's all alone now," he said, biting off a wing. Emily said Sarah called her, tried to make peace, but everyone was tired of her whining. She lives in that one-room apartment of hers, posts on social media about how she was betrayed, but not a word about what she did. Not about Nick, not about how she humiliated you. Ethan nodded, swirling his beer. He knew this already, he'd seen her posts, the occasional ones, in his feed before he'd blocked her profile. Sarah wrote about toxic people, about hard lessons, but she never mentioned her own fault. She blamed her friends, her coworkers, even him, but never herself. Her life, once full of parties and hookups, now seemed empty, and Ethan, to his surprise, felt neither gloating nor pity, only indifference. "She'll have to figure this out on her own," he said, his voice calm. "I'm not part of her story anymore." Jack raised his glass, grinning. "Let's drink to that. To a new chapter, dude." Ethan clinked glasses with them, feeling the last threads that bound him to Sarah dissolve. Her betrayal, her cruelty, her lies, all of it, strangely, had been his liberation. She had destroyed their marriage, but in that destruction, he had found himself. He had chosen himself, his desires, his pride, his happiness. And Mia, with her laughter, her support, her love, had been the one who had helped him see it. That night, as Ethan lay in bed, he watched Mia read a book, underlining with a pencil. He thought about how far he had come from the man who had endured humiliation, turned a blind eye to betrayal, and lived in the shadow of other people's expectations. Now here he was, with a career that inspired him, friends who were there for him, a woman who saw the best in him. "Mia," he called quietly, and she looked up. She put the book down, her eyes warm. "I love you," he said, and the words, simple and honest, were easier than he expected. She smiled, leaning down to kiss him. "I love you too, Ethan. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.